Hello, viewers, and welcome to the second episode of Faith versus Faith, the series of videos in which I attempt to compare the beliefs, teachings, and practices of Jehovah's Witnesses with other religious movements. And I'm very excited with this episode because I'm getting to speak to a former Bible student. That's right. So a lot of people watching this video, maybe you're an ex-Jehovah's Witness, maybe you're a Jehovah's Witness, but you're aware of the fact that Bible students are or were part of the history of the Jehovah's Witness movement, I'm sure. So it's fascinating for me to be able to speak to Peter Jeuck, who is joining us from, let me see, where are you from? New Jersey, Peter?
I'm from northern New Jersey, in the greater New York City area.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us, because I have some questions. As you can probably imagine, I know that you're a subscriber to my channel, so you know all sorts of things about Jehovah's Witnesses, but you've certainly expressed to me that you can see parallels in your upbringing as a Bible student. Would that be right?
To a great extent. That's one of the reasons why I continued to follow the ex-Jehovah's Witness activist movement online. It's because so many of the experiences of Jehovah's Witnesses growing up were parallel to the types of experiences that I had as a child growing up. Although that was during the 1960s and 1970s. So
I see. Well, I was actually going to ask you, just to give us a bit of background, really, as to how you came to be involved with the Bible students.
Well, I'm a fourth generation Bible student. My whole darn family was in the Bible students. Let's just say that. There wasn't a family member on either side of my paternal, maternal side of my family that wasn't. We went back to the early days of the Watchtower. On my father's side, my grandmother or her parents, my great-grandparents, they had emigrated from England and joined the Bible students here in America in the 1890s. And they actually bought some property down in St. Petersburg, Florida, that was donated to the Watchtower during the early 1900s. And my grandmother grew up in St. Petersburg, Florida, where there was a Bible student class. And that was probably in around 1906 or sometime in that era. My other grandparents emigrated from Scotland on my maternal side. They met the purser of the ship. They befriended the purser of the ship, steamship Columbia, that took them from Scotland or England, I guess, to New York City. And not knowing anybody in New York City, the purser suggested that they contact the newly relocated Bible students. The Bethel had moved from Pennsylvania to Brooklyn in 1909, and that was the year my great-grandparents had moved to the United States. And my grandmother was about 6 years old at the time.
So it would be fair to say that your family history with the Bible students stretches all the way back to the times of Charles Taze Russell.
Oh, yes. My grandmother sat on Charles Taze Russell's knee.
I'm sure lots of girls did.
It sounds a little creepy.
Yeah.
She told this story over and over. 1914, it was coming up. Everybody had great expectations for 1914. And my great grandparents were very worried that my grandmother, who was just a child, wasn't going to make the 144,000. You see, before Rutherford changed a number of doctrines in the 1920s and 30s, there was only one call that the Watchtower preached, and that was the harvest work to the 144,000. And so
To go to
everybody
heaven.
to heaven, that's
Yeah.
right. It
Yeah.
was the heavenly class, and everybody who was baptized and immersed were what I guess what Watchtower would call now the anointed. They were consecrated Bible students with the hope of going to be part of the high calling or the 144,000. And they didn't want my grandmother to miss out on that. So my great grandmother arranged an interview with Charles Russell. She entered into his office. He shut the door, sat her down on his knee, and she said he stroked her hair
Yeah.
and asked her some questions. And after about 10 minutes, the interview was over, and he said she was not ready for consecration. So she didn't become a Bible student until 1938. So,
Wow. So I think we can establish that your roots, or certainly your family's roots, go very far back. I'm just interested in what caused you to leave the Bible students.
well, it's not true. I mean, I think that I'm a little bit.
Oh, the beliefs aren't true, you mean?
Yes, the beliefs
Yeah,
are.
yeah, yeah.
Just as Watchtower, what they preach today, the New Light, the New Light business. I remember hearing my grandfather, who was an elder during the 1920s, my paternal grandfather, during the turmoil years after Russell's death. When I was as a child, I remember him talking about the channel, New Light, and what did it for him was when Rutherford said that Adam was not going to receive a resurrection, Adam and Eve. That was it. That he said that destroyed the whole concept of Russell's concept of the ransom, a man for a man. And so he left the Watchtower at that point. That was sometime during the 1920s. But my
So there was a
family.
bit of a parallel with your own exit. You probably, I'm assuming, had some kind of eureka moment where you just thought, no, this doesn't make sense.
Eureka moment. I tell you, there were so many confused Bible student kids. At the time I was growing up, it was the 60s and the 70s. I liked your video where you use, are you going to San Francisco? Because that's the time I grew up in. It was a revolutionary period. There was the civil rights movement. There was free love. There was the hippies. There was, Woodstock, which was only a few miles from where I lived. And it was confusing because we were told there was a very, very strong emphasis to keep us kids segregated from the world. There were they're not many of us, but in the greater New York region, there were probably 60, 70 children, Bible student children from various ecclesias. And they'd bring us together once a month, what they called children's gatherings, all day indoctrination sessions where we'd be instructed by elders, and we would be told that college was dangerous because of evolution, or we'd become atheists. But then we had this revolutionary world going on around us, and it sort of played havoc in our minds, and many of us rebelled. I was one of the rebellers. In fact, I could never live that reputation down.
So it sounds you're painting a picture that will be familiar to many Jehovah's Witnesses or ex-Jehovah's Witnesses watching this, of quite a controlling environment in which to grow up. I'm just wondering, on reflection, when you look back at the Bible student faith and particularly your upbringing, Would you be able to say that any of the Bible student practices or teachings are harmful or abusive?
Yes, they were. I know that in terms of my wife just woke up and
Okay.
she's shouting in the background.
Hello. Hi.
Yes, they were abusive. I remember one children's gathering. We spent a special session on appropriate sexual behavior, and self-abuse was a sin unto death. And I swear to God, from that time until I was about 20 years old, I thought I was going to die in the second death. I mean,
so sexual repression basically was a thing.
Sexual repression was huge. There were very, let's put it this way. When my wife and I announced that we were going to get married, people came up to her and warned them about me, that I was not marrying material, because I didn't really meet the standards of the model Bible students. So
you were too wild.
They considered me too wild and a bad influence on the other kids.
And I considered it a plus.
Yeah. So
your wife just said that she considered that a plus, did she?
Yes, she did, because she was a Bible student on the fringe. Her father was a Bible student, but her mother wasn't. So she didn't go to the meetings. So I never knew her until 1978. I knew just about everybody in the Bible students movement, but I didn't know her. And when I was about 18, 19 years old, I stopped going to meetings. And for several years, I kind of followed my own pursuit. Got into some self-destructive ways. I even had a manager threaten to shoot me at one point, and I decided that maybe the Bible students were right about me, and so I came back, and I went to a general convention and met Stephanie. We were engaged 3 weeks later, married 5 months later, and 38 years we're still together.
That actually brings me to one of my questions. I'm curious to know whether Bible students are encouraged to marry only between themselves.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
I would imagine that causes a few problems if it's a very small religion.
We're being recorded right now. So.
By the way, does Stephanie want to come on? But by all means.
I'm right here.
Chair. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, how you doing? It's good to see you. Good to know you.
Thank you. Well, we might as well make it a threesome with with the conversation we're already having. But yeah, I was just asking about the whole element of marriage, because obviously for Jehovah's Witnesses, Jehovah's Witnesses have to marry only in the Lord, as it were, which when you've got a religion of 8 million, it's difficult, but it's doable. But I can imagine with the Bible students being a much smaller religion, I mean, how many Bible students are there at the moment at this point?
Oh, I really couldn't tell you, but there are quite a few less than there used to be. Yes, the emphasis is to marry in the truth. Again, I made a glossary once of terminology, and there's so like the emblems for memorial. We use a lot of the same language. The Jehovah's Witnesses inherited a lot of the language from the Bible students. A lot of the culture had passed on from the Bible students into the Jehovah's Witnesses. But yes, it is very hard to find a wife in the Bible students because there's so few. I sent you a photograph of the 2016
Well,
General.
I'll show this photograph now, actually, so viewers can see for themselves. So while you're talking, people will be looking at the photograph. So continue. Tell us about this photograph.
Well, that photograph, I'm probably related to about a quarter of those people.
Right.
It's a very, and maybe not quite that much, but many of them are my cousins.
Second cousins.
And mostly first cousins. But that is about the extent of the Bible students movement today. Maybe multiply that by 4 or 5, and that's probably it across the United States.
Right. So the entire United States Bible student community is maybe only 4 or 5 times the number of people in that picture. Is that right?
That photograph, just about.
Yeah.
That would be a fair guess.
Yeah.
When I was a child, I grew up in the New York Bible Students Ecclesia. There were 110 that met regularly. The whole class together was about 140. They had all-day meetings on Sunday, and it was mandated that you were there all day. So we would be there 9 o'clock at the McBurney Y on 23rd Street, and we wouldn't get home until 6 o'clock in the evening. So Sunday meetings were an all-day affair. That was very difficult growing up to not we had to sit like statues, dressed up in our little suits and the ties, and it was a very difficult situation. They did have Sunday schools for us, but that, just one Sunday school, and the rest of the time was sitting in the meetings, which were structured after the old-time Bible students meetings. We had studies, which were always out of the Studies in the Scriptures series, the 6 volumes. We never accepted the 7th volume. There were talks given by the elders. We had about 8 elders. Norman Woodworth was our predominant elder. He was the one that really regathered the Bible.
He was a relative of Clayton Woodworth, was he?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, first cousin.
Right.
He was my grandfather's best friend, and my grandmother was his secretary for 25 years at the Dawn. He began the Dawn Bible Students in 1932, and I found an estimate. We're talking about numbers. I found an estimate. My brother down in North Carolina found a court case where the Bible student had moved from Brooklyn to the Dawn had moved from the Brooklyn to Rutherford, New Jersey, and the town of Rutherford was trying to collect $27,000 worth of taxes in 1946, and the dispute went into Superior Court in New Jersey. And my grandparents were called to testify, as well as Norman Woodworth, who had started the Dawn. And he claimed at that time that there were about 56,000 Bible students across the globe. And most of them would have been in the United States and Canada at the time. So we've gone from 56,000 Bible students to just in the United States, just maybe several thousand. Actually, when Eastern Europe opened up, there were many more Bible students we discovered when communism was in Poland and Romania especially. There were quite a few Bible students that we didn't know about.
Well, that's interesting actually, because I don't know whether I've mentioned this to you. But I met my wife Diana in Croatia. The reason why I met her was because there was a guy in her congregation, obviously a Jehovah's Witness congregation, who attended the same ministerial training school as me in the UK, And he's basically the reason why Deanna and I met each other, because we all decided to go on our reunion, on our first year reunion in Croatia, to visit Miroslav. That's his name, and that's how I met Deanna. But the interesting thing is that Miroslav is now an apostate, but he's become a Bible student. So he's gone from being a Jehovah's Witness to being a Bible student. And he's actually made several unsuccessful attempts to convince me to join him in following Charles Taze Russell. So it's quite astonishing how far-flung Bible students are.
That's an interesting story. I don't know. There were many Romanian and Polish Bible students that came to the United States when it was a little freer for them to travel. And so I met some. I don't know if he's ever been to the U.S., but I do know a number. In fact, actually, there were some Romanian young fellows that were interested in our daughters. But there are former Jehovah's Witnesses that have become Bible students. I know a number.
Yeah.
Right.
They jumped ship. I think they felt that it was JW light,
Right. Okay. So a less constraining form of Jehovah's Witnesses, basically.
Right.
Yeah. There's one who's now a fairly prominent elder in the Bible students. He left. It's a big deal to the Bible students when a Jehovah's Witness becomes a Bible student. They swarm around them, and it's like welcome back, brother.
Love bomb. Yeah.
The Bible students have never lost the feeling for their history and their connection to the Watchtower.
Right.
Now, they will never associate themselves as Jehovah's Witnesses and will never really admit to the Watchtower. They'd be anti-Watchtower today, but there's still this almost like longing in the way that Bible.
They want reunification. Would you say, or
what's that?
Are they interested in kind of achieving some kind of reunification?
No.
The JWs are all wrong. They're the bad guys.
Right.
We're the the Bible students have it right. The JWs are left, and they're in second death.
Charles Taze Russell had the truth. He was the wise and faithful servant, and the Laodicean messenger.
So if Jehovah's Witness, it's not going to happen, I know, but if Jehovah's Witnesses en masse were to, repudiate, Rutherford and reaffirm their allegiance to Charles Taze Russell, that would be kind of the ideal situation for Bible students, would it? Or
no, it'd be very problematic.
Yeah.
All right.
Because it's limited to 144,000.
Oh, of course, yeah, of course. Because I was going to ask you about the 144,000, because obviously you guys, I say you guys, the Bible students, through necessity.
I was a Bible student for most of my life.
Yeah.
Only been the past 15 years.
Well, I wasn't really a Bible student all those years.
I was going to ask, I was just going to clarify what you were just saying, though, about the 144,000, because you make an interesting point that the whole teaching of the great crowd inheriting a paradise earth, that was kind of something that came really from necessity as the Jehovah's Witnesses grew and grew and grew, whereas the Bible students have never really had to grapple with that mathematical problem, have they? Because if you only believe in 144,000 going to heaven, you don't have to worry about where the numbers are going to go.
That's exactly right. In fact, they are looking forward to the demise of the religion. They're probably one of the few religions that are looking forward to their own demise.
Wow.
Yeah, they think it's going to happen. Some say 1022. I mean, 2022 and 2034.
Well, no, 43. There's a new date. Bible students love dates. I'm not supposed to be here. You're not supposed to be here because George Kendall, prominent Bible student in the 1940s, had predicted that 1954 was going to be the year the kingdom began. And it was because of this idea of the double. I mean, the double is very strongly connected to 1914 because Charles Russell taught that the punishment of Israel being under Gentile powers was going to be double. So you take 1260 and 1260, and that's where you get the 5220 or whatever it is. That brings them from 606 BC. At the time, they didn't count the 0 year.
Isn't it convenient that there's any number of multiplier verses in the Bible to get to the date that you need? But I just want to kind of ask you about Armageddon, actually, because since we're touching on that subject, obviously I've researched, Charles Taze Russell and, the early days of Jehovah's Witnesses. And one thing that I've never quite been able to wrap my head around, and I'm hoping you can help with, is what did Armageddon look like to Charles Taze Russell, or what does it look like to Bible students? Because, I'm just to kind of frame this in context. Obviously, the publications of Jehovah's Witnesses have fireballs coming down from the sky and the ground opening up and buildings collapsing. And it was only it was only really in the years of Rutherford that picture started to kind of crystallize. But what does Armageddon look like to the Bible students?
Well, first off, Rutherford was a psychopath narcissist, and he was he just like.
Oh, you're just biased.
But on top of that, what it looked like to Bible students, it wasn't a very pretty picture. First off, Charles Taze Russell didn't have any idea of nuclear weapons. So, at that time, he literally took Armageddon as being, he thought it would be a social revolution.
Yeah.
A social revolution, literally every man's hand against his neighbor, total chaos. He really thought it would be a socialist uprising that would get spread worldwide and be so terrible that unless God intervened, everybody would kill each other off, literally.
Right.
But as Bible students evolved, one of the things that really has bolstered Bible students' beliefs is the return of Israel. And they say we're right because Charles Russell predicted the return of Israel in their land before the kingdom could be set up. And Rutherford, he became anti-Semitic and wanted nothing to do with the Jews. So when Israel became a state in 1948, that Bible students were elated. I know so many Bible students that moved to Israel because they wanted to be at the center of the action when the kingdom began.
Wow.
Because they believe the kingdom is going to start in Israel.
So how did the Bible students' concept of Armageddon shift? Because you've described for us kind of a political revolution. That was the idea of what Armageddon would be for Russell. Did it stay like that? Is that how Bible students still think of Armageddon?
Well, in a way, because they are reluctant to give up Charles Russell's writings, but many forecast some sort of a nuclear event.
Well,
a war that
my brother's got an estate, and he started collecting grains, and he's growing his own,
miracle
food.
wheat.
Yeah, not miracle week, but
Yeah,
he's prepared.
He's prepared for Armageddon and when things go bad. But the concept of Armageddon is going to be a global conflict in which governments all start beginning to collapse, fall apart, fighting one another. There will be the use of nuclear weapons, and they cite Ezekiel 38 and 39 as evidence of a nuclear event, and God intervenes before the world completely destroys itself. So they've updated the idea to kind of include some of the more modern weaponry that we have today. But it's a global event. People will be, and Bible students believe that they will be persecuted. That's something that's very similar to Watchtower.
So once Armageddon's been and gone, obviously the Bible students believe that they're all going to be in heaven ruling. Yeah. But who gets to live on the earth after Armageddon's over?
Well, those who happen to make it through Armageddon will live into the kingdom, and they believe in the resurrection for all.
Right.
There isn't, again, this was what you pointed out earlier about the Jonadab class. That was the coup that allowed Rutherford to grow the organization to an indefinite size. That's what restricted the Bible students, because they were limited by the 144,000 concept. But the Jonadab, the great crowd group, that allowed that gave impetus to the idea of let's save everybody before this horrible end, and those that respond will inherit the earth. Bible students take a broader view, and they believe that everybody who's died will be covered by Jesus' ransom sacrifice and receive a resurrection. So all people will get a chance in the 1,000 years. So in that sense, they're more, let's say, magnanimous than the Watchtower is.
So they still believe there's going to be a paradise. They just don't think they're going to be living in it.
Well, they'll be ruling it.
They'll be ruling it, right?
Yeah,
they're going to be the kings and priests.
They're basically going to have immortality and be like God.
Yeah, that's right. That's what the divine nature is. They believe that
can't die, then you're God. Right?
The reward is to be co-rulers, co-inheritors with Jesus and God. God and Jesus will be sharing their throne, and the 144,000 will be their co-rulers who will be kings and priests to teach the people of earth during the 1,000 years the righteousness and the 10 Commandments and so on.
And then the little season comes.
Yeah, the little season comes. And I've always wondered what Watchtower thought. I looked up in the Watchtower library about the little season because Revelation says at the end of the 1,000 years Satan shall be loosed, and for
a short period of time.
Yeah. That's another gripe I got.
The short period of time that Jehovah's Witnesses believe began in 1914 and is still going on. So it's over 100 years of short period of time.
So wow.
That's either you make it or you get.
Yeah, that's interesting because
based on a doorstep visit.
Because the Bible student, and this one is one thing that I never really understood, that after 1,000 years of living righteously, and then Satan being loosed,
he's having to trust you.
That he's able to gather
test you.
all of these millions of people to surround the camp of the saints and challenge God's authority again, and then God rains fire upon him, and then that's the final end of Satan and his minions, and everybody lives happily forever on earth. And that's another thing.
Jehovah's Witnesses have the same thing, really.
Yeah.
But before Stephanie goes away, she's wandering off again. I'm just interested, Stephanie, to know what life is like for women within the Bible students. Are women respected as equals in the Bible student religion?
Yeah, they tried for, but my dad was a Bible student. I started into it as a child in Oklahoma City. They tried to make me put a cloth on my head,
Covering.
Head covering. And I never got that in Oklahoma. A lady used to pin a napkin on her head. And I'd, Dad, why is she always sticking napkins on her head? Paper napkin. And they kept giving them to me, and I'm like, oh, thank you very much, I never wore them. And I mean, look at this hair. It's not
she
exactly.
was a rebel.
Yeah, I was a rebel. I never did.
Jehovah's Witnesses have head coverings, but it's only for very, very, only on very kind of specific occasions, when it's perhaps in the preaching work, and a female Jehovah's Witness is having a study, say, with a guy. She has to recognise his headship by if she's actually the one who's conducting the study. She has to recognise his headship by having a head covering on.
We ended up living next to Jehovah's Witnesses.
Actually, he was our landlord.
He was our landlord before we moved to this house. And it was right after he finished school. And before we left, I mean, I was not at all interested in being a JW, but before we left, I thought, hey, here's a good chance. So I asked if I could come and sit in on a meeting. And I took it the same way as our meetings. I thought you could raise your hand at any point and talk and whatnot. And I'd raise my hand, and he'd just ignore me, and everyone would look at me, So they totally ignored me, and I afterwards, kind of grabbed him by the collar, and so I could see how repressive the JWs were compared to the Bible students.
But the Bible students are very repressive too. Women can't have any positions all the elders are men, all the deacons are men. Elders, ministerial servants, we call deacons. Anybody who has anything to do as a class servant in certain respects has to be male. The women can bring, they can do service work like food. If there's a convention, their service is providing the food to feed the convention. They have to wear head coverings. Head coverings is a big deal amongst the Bible students. And in some of the clips that I showed you, if you notice, you'll see the head of one of the women wearing a typical head covering.
Well, I'm going to get to those clips, actually, because I asked you to prepare a couple of clips for our viewers of video material, just to kind of prove, in case anyone who's watching this is still doubting that Bible students are a thing. Actually, before I show those clips, there's this booklet that I was just hurriedly running to find just before we went on air. And it's a little colour booklet titled The Great Pyramid and the Bible. And on the inside cover, it looks like quite a recently printed booklet. And on the inside cover, it says, reprinted with slight revisions by the Layman's Home Missionary Movement. Is that anything to do with the Bible students, or is that a different...
They're Bible students. They call themselves Bible students, but they are different in many respects.
So they're like another offshoot, are they?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they're an early offshoot. In fact, the PSL Johnson, and I know you know but PSL Johnson he caused Rutherford quite a bit of trouble in his very first months of being president of the Watchtower. And things didn't go well between them, and he was able to get 4 directors to help support him, and there was nearly a coup. But, I tell you the one thing, Bible students have always been inept. And that's one thing that Rutherford was not. He was not inept. He was a shrewd lawyer.
Yeah.
And so these 4 guys who tried to limit Rutherford's power, they found themselves ousted on a legal technicality. And
I write about that in my book, the leadership coup of 1917. Yeah,
I know that. I read your book.
Yeah.
And the P.S.L. Johnson started the Layman's Home Missionary.
Right.
Let's cut right to it.
Okay.
Because
the reason why I brought that up is because the book is titled, as I say, The Great Pyramid in the Bible, and I wanted to show, in fact I will show just now, the clip that you have put together or that you sent me, and it's of the divine plan of the ages. So let's just take a look.
We have a lesson today on the chart of the ages, and we hope to cover most, if not all, of the little particulars and nuances on the chart. It might be a little different kind of a chart study than we usually have. Well, friends, we have on your screen the chart of the ages in a PDF form, and we're going to be looking at various pieces of this. But you'll see we're going to be able to enlarge parts of this. Oops, we don't want that second part. But you see the scripture on the bottom. Write the vision and make it plain upon tables. Now, that scripture comes from Habakkuk 2, verse 2. And it appears on almost every version of the chart. We want to emphasize, however, that the scripture itself is not explicitly prophetic of the chart of the ages. As a matter of fact, the chart of the ages has a background even in the Miller movement. Now, they didn't understand the whole divine plan, but they were very famous for having charts, diagrams of prophecy, and on some of their diagrams, they actually put this text, Habakkuk 2, verse 2. And of course, it's a reasonable fitting text to put on a chart because it talks about making the vision, writing it down, and making it plain upon tables. And you may know that Nelson Barber, who was an early associate of Pastor Russell, was a Millerite. He was a follower of Brother William Miller, and therefore he would have easily known these charts and diagrams were often accompanied by Habakkuk 2:2. And it was Brother Barber who published The Three Worlds in cooperation with Brother Russell, but as both of them agreed, it was essentially written by Brother Barber. And so the predicate for this using Habakkuk 2:2 really came from him through a link with the Miller movement. And of course, Brother Russell then took the preliminary chart of the ages that Brother Barber had introduced.
So, Peter, talk us through what we've just seen. Would it be fair to say that the divine plan of the ages continues to have prominence among Bible students?
Very much so.
Yeah.
But Bible students very much hold to this. Now, I don't know the Layman's Home Missionary movement very well. We didn't mix because they believed that the door to the high calling was shut, so there's a difference there. P.S.L. Johnson was the last of the high calling, and his successor, Raymond Jolly, was the last of the Great Company, which was also considered by Russell to be a heavenly class. They're the also-rans.
But if you could, because obviously there'll be lots of people who are watching this video who don't know what the divine plan of the ages is, and rather than me try and explain it, I'd love to hear it off the lips of a former Bible student. So how would you explain the divine plan of the ages?
That's a good question. No, the divine plan of the ages is they're a dispensational organization. In the 19th century, Russell hooked up with people like George Storrs, and there were a number of influences on Charles Russell during the 19th century.
I think
and
that
had dispensational ideas, and these represent periods of time. The first arc is called the first dispensation. That represents the time before the flood. The second dispensation is the time after the flood to the present time. And then the third dispensation is the world without end. That's the beginning of the 1,000-year kingdom under the rule of Christ, and that's a rule that will never end. So in the most broad sense, in the general sense, those three arcs represent those three different dispensations or periods.
So basically, just if we could summarize it, it's just a way of thinking about Bible chronology by making it fall into different dispensations. Would that be fair?
That's correct.
Right. Okay.
And they make parallels. That's what some of these sub bumps are.
I like the way you call them bumps. Is that a technical expression?
No, it's not a technical. I just call them.
We always call them Humpty Bumps.
Yeah.
Humpty Bumps.
Really ridiculous.
My father was an elder, and whenever he talked about the plan of the ages, his hand motions, he would go
right.
Like that.
Okay.
Which obviously was to represent the divine plan chart.
Now, sorry, just to kind of, because I'm anxious to talk as well about this other clip that you put together for us, because before we looked at a photograph of the Bible Student General Convention, and you've actually got for us a clip of a speaker at the General Convention. So let's just take a look at that now.
Brother Peter Mora from Los Angeles, California, will open up with our welcome address. Brother Peter.
Thank you, Brother Michael. Thank you, Brother Tom, for your prayer. And good morning, brethren. It's wonderful to see all of you here for the 2016 Bible Students General Convention. Looking around, I see we have lots of different categories of brethren here today. Some of you have been in the truth for many years and are living a life of complete dedication to the Lord. On the other extreme, some of you are brand new and are excited about learning more about God's wonderful plan for the whole world. And the rest of you are somewhere in the middle. Perhaps some of you are here not because it's what you really want to do, but because you know deep down it's what you should be doing. Well, that reminds me of a man who was running late for a very important business meeting. He was driving around desperately looking for a parking place, but could not find one, no matter how hard he tried. Finally, he looked up and said, "Lord, if you provide me a parking place, I promise to go to church every Sunday from now on." As the last words left his lips, a parking place opened up right in front of him. He then looked up and said, "Never mind, I found one."
So there's actually a few things that I found interesting about this. The first thing that he mentioned was that there were new. He was saying that there were new converts at the convention. Is that realistic? Is it realistic for there to be new people joining the Bible student movement this late in the game?
It's not unusual to find one or two individuals, or maybe a handful of individuals. I actually almost thought of sending you a clip of the baptismal service, because every General Convention there's a baptismal service, and the baptismal service is certainly smaller in scale than watchtowers, but not too terribly different. But they don't baptize themselves to an organization. They baptize themselves to their consecration to God,
right?
And which is complete. Means that you give up everything in your life, your goals, your aspirations, everything. And that's supposed to, your entire life is directed to serving God, and your beliefs in the what the culture and the beliefs tell you have to do. But new converts are few, far few between, and most of them are probably children of Bible students.
Yeah. So another thing I found interesting was when the speaker said that he basically admitted that there would be lots of people there, not because they wanted to be there, but because they felt that they had to be there. And I actually thought that was quite an interesting moment of honesty. Is that the kind of tone that speakers take at Bible student gatherings?
Some of them can be quite condescending, actually. Right. But typically speaking, it isn't so much that way. A lot of them, it's character development, the emphasis on, away from worldly desires against worldly pursuits. You're frowned upon if you spend too much time. Well, for example, getting a bachelor's degree is something that most would not object to. Okay, education is not as strongly discouraged as with Watchtower. However, beyond a bachelor's degree, they consider a bachelor's degree kind of like what a high school degree would be 50 years ago. If you go for a master's degree or a PhD, well, that's carrying it too far. You see, you're following your own pursuit. And when I was going for my master's degree, I came under quite a bit of criticism from my aunt. For why isn't the bachelor's degree enough for me? And so that I was being worldly. I was being criticized for not really living up to my consecration.
So higher education's frowned upon as well for Bible students, is it?
To some extent, yes, especially the higher end of higher education. The bachelor's degree is acceptable, and most will not discourage that. Maybe some of the old timers would. My father said that he was discouraged because the kingdom was just around the corner, and it was a waste of time to go to school, and he should be putting more time into the ministry, and I was told I was never going to grow up. Again, we had the same. The kingdom is just around the corner.
Yeah.
One interesting thing. I learned about the Jehovah's Witnesses not until I was about 10 years old at the World's Fair. Now, in 1964, 1965, there was a World's Fair held in New York City. And at the World's Fair, there was a pavilion, the religions of the world. And I wasn't familiar with any other religion except ours. And we had a booth there with our Dawn publication literature. We had a setup with these dioramas that were kind of based on the photodrama of creation. And there were 5 or 6 of these dioramas that depicted Adam and the fall. And then some of Abraham sacrificing Isaac, and then the kingdom with everybody walking away from a world of destruction into a world of paradise with a rainbow around it, and so on. And my parents, I was the oldest of 3 boys, and my parents didn't want kids hanging around the booth. Now they served at the booth. very frequently because there weren't that many Bible students to man it, and the booth had to be manned while the fair was in operation. So they had to find volunteers. So we spent a lot of time at the New York World's Fair when I was a child, and we roamed free because we weren't supposed to be near the booth. We were supposed, kids were to be seen and not heard. So I wandered around with my brothers to these other religious booths, and lo and behold, there was this booth with this big photograph of Charles Taze Russell. He was our guy.
You can't have him, he's ours.
And who are these? And I was kind of shy. I would approach them, but that was our. Charles Russell, to me growing up was kind of like the grandfather I never knew, and his picture was everywhere. Everybody talked about him. I mean, there wasn't his name comes up in every talk and every meeting. He's it's a personality cult sort of thing, and so they're very, very, even today, very devoted. They Bible students, elders will quote from the reprints, from the Watchtower reprints from 1879 to 1916 as frequently as they will quote from the Bible.
It's interesting you should say that, because when I was doing the research for my book, one very useful tool that I discovered was there's actually a website, a Bible student website that has online versions of all of the old Watchtower articles, the reprints. And you can search through those, and you can also search through studies in the scriptures. And I just found that a very useful tool, because even though I have, for example, I've got all of the studies in the scriptures, but it was useful to be able to search the words, which you can't obviously do with an actual book. So it was obvious just from that the Bible students are still very, very keen on Charles Taze Russell's writings.
That site probably was the Herald. The Herald was another group, the Pastoral Bible Institute, which formed in 1919, again, shortly after Rutherford took over. So that was another Bible student organization, and it became important because it actually helped the Dawn Bible students begin. If there wasn't a New York Bible Students Ecclesia for Norman Woodworth to meet at, the Dawn Bible students would never have started.
So you mentioned the Dawn Bible students. Could you just kind of explain as simply as possible kind of what the structure is? I mean, we're talking about Bible students, but there's obviously all the different, you're talking about Dawn Bible students now. How are Bible students distinguished from Dawn Bible students, and what if anything is the actual kind of leadership of the Bible students today?
Okay, well, the Dawn Bible students started in 1932. They were started in New York City. It was originally a PBI class, Pastoral Bible Institute, class of Bible students that met independently of the Watchtower.
It was wasn't it when Woodworth got kicked out?
Well, yeah, when Woodworth left in 1928. You can find Woodworth's name in the 1927 yearbook. I know, just a quick aside, going through some of the old yearbooks, 1927, 28, 29, there's a list of speakers called Pilgrim speakers, and they were officially designated speakers for the Watchtower. They represented the Watchtower, and they would be sent to ecclesias across the country to speak. And Norman Woodworth, Russell Pollock, Seclemian, John Dawson. There are probably a dozen names or more that I knew right off the bat who disappeared from the list around 1930 because they all left. In 1929, Bible students that had left the Watchtower, disenfranchised Bible students, they had what they called the Bible Students Reunion Convention in 1929. And that was organized by Norman Woodworth, who had started meeting with the New York Bible Students Ecclesia, which was a pastoral Bible students class. And in 1932, Woodworth got the idea of starting the Dawn with the intent of regathering the many thousands of disenfranchised Bible students.
What was the Dawn, though? Was it like a magazine?
The Dawn was a magazine.
Right.
It was a radio program first called Frank and Ernest, and the Dawn magazine started as a follow-up on the radio program called Radio Echoes. And because they ran out of money to do any more radio programs, they changed the name of the magazine to The Dawn and continued publishing that. And then from the 1930s, they began to grow, and by the end of the 1930s, were once again able to come up with the funds to broadcast on radio. And they had around 80 radio stations at peak around the United States. And they were very successful in regathering many Bible students who had just walked away from the Watchtower.
Wasn't that like 75%?
Well, yeah, I think what she's referring to is the estimate that was made by William Schnell in his book, 30 Years a Watchtower Slave. He estimated that 75% of the original Bible student membership had left the society by the late 1920s, and he had some numbers, and they hang together. Given the fact that I found an independent reference indicating that 56,000 Bible students associated with the Dawn by the 1940s sort of suggests that Schnell was correct. And that number came from the subscription list of the Dawn magazine. So Woodworth was not making up those numbers.
But talk us through how things developed, because obviously you had the Dawn starting up in the 30s. What's the picture for us today? Is there kind of like a unified kind of body that kind of organizes the Bible students? For example, organizes the General Convention.
They have a committee that is elected by the convention that organizes the convention on an annual basis.
Right.
The convention elects. Bible students elect. There is no controlling central body.
Right, I see.
Body.
Yeah. It's basically a democracy.
It's the way it was before Rutherford took over.
Yeah.
And it all began when Rutherford started assigning individuals to represent the Watchtowers, the Watchtower in each of the individual ecclesias during the 1920s. Their efforts to advertise, and so that's where the number keeping started, and that's how the Watchtower began to get their fingers into the individual independent ecclesias. But before Rutherford took over during Russell's day, all Bible student ecclesias were autonomous, and that was maintained. That structure was maintained when the Bible students regathered in the 1930s. Woodworth was an organizing force, and the people associated with Woodworth during the 30s, they were an organizing force but they were not a controlling force.
Right.
They would send speakers out and organize classes, but once the class was organized, then they elected their own elders, and they became an autonomous body.
So they did have 12 trustees.
Oh yeah, the Dawn has a membership. You have to be nominated and elected and approved to be a member. I was a Dawn member at one point. It's supposed to be quite an honor because there are very few relatively few members.
Sorry, because we're kind of running out of time, but I wanted to, before we go, I wanted to ask you, as a former Bible student, so as somebody who understands kind of the heritage of Watchtower, and this applies to you as well, Stephanie, what's your impression of Jehovah's Witnesses and Watchtower today?
I don't have a very favorable impression of them at all, because anybody that tries to control people's lives to the degree that Watchtower, the governing body, does is morally wrong. You've
been very helpful in our understanding of JWs.
Oh, thank you.
We absolutely love watching we can't wait to watch your videos.
You'll be on one of the next ones.
we get a kick out of them.
But our impression of Watchtower is, there's a lot that's made out of this idea of cult versus religion, and I don't know what the difference is. I mean, Catholicism, has 1 billion people, okay, and they can be excommunicated for certain things. For 1,000 years, people's lives were controlled to the degree that the Watchtower controls the lives of their members. What's a cult?
Yeah.
But the thing is that they are doing things that hurt people, and that's wrong. They hurt, and the minds. I think it's so important for people to be able to think for themselves and to make their own choices and to live their life freely.
To get a good education.
I think that an education is very important, and it's something that they deny their individuals.
It's been stolen from the children.
There's a lot that's being made of the child abuse situation, the Australian Commission.
And that's horrific.
And of course, yes, that is horrific.
It's horrific.
The Catholic Church had their day in the news with that too.
It happened in the Bible students when we were actually working there.
Yeah, we actually had a situation.
Wow.
But I think one of the most immoral things is, and many bring it out, but I think it's terribly immoral. It's a moral thing when they baptize children who are 6 and 7 or 8 years old, and then obligate them to it's like a contract, an irrevocable contract that these children are making these decisions at an age where they can't make that kind of a decision. They're not old enough to do that. And you brought that out so well. A child that can smoke, drink, buy a house, drive a car.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be making and that's a moral thing, because then what happens is it ties that child into the society, so that if he begins to think for himself and think independently, then they lose everything. They lose their social connections. They lose their family, and that's wrong. That's child abuse.
It is.
You're obviously going to get no arguments from me, but it's still nice to hear that perspective from somebody who wasn't raised as a witness. I mean, obviously, the Bible student religion has its similarities, but you're still looking at this pretty much as an outsider as far as Watchtower is concerned, and it's nice to have that solidarity. And if I may say, viewers won't know this, but you have been very supportive, in fact, of my work over the last few months, and I really appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to catching up with you when I come to America in a few weeks. So that'll be really good.
Look forward to it too.
Yeah, we're excited about that. I can't wait to see that little baby of yours.
Yes, you'll get to see Jessica. So.
Yeah.
But sorry. But yeah, we'll leave it there if you don't mind. But what we'll do is we'll say that if anybody, I would like to have another conversation with you in the future, because I actually think I said the same thing with the previous video about Mormons. I actually think that there are so many similarities, you can't do it justice in just one video. So it would be nice if we could have another video with you two, in the future. And what we can ask our viewers to do is to comment below if there's any questions that you would like us to consider in the next video that we do together. Would you be okay with doing another video in the future?
I'd be more than pleased to do so.
Fantastic.
And anything I can do to help,
We support you 1,000%.
I think it's so important.
Very
freedom
much
of mind.
admire you and are real impressed with your command of the language.
Oh, yeah. We love how you express yourself.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Very articulate.
Yes.
Before my head completely explodes, we'll probably leave it there. But again, thank you so much for joining us, Peter and Stephanie, and we'll have you in a future video. And to the viewers, I hope you found this interesting, and as always, thank you for watching.